You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to the 602 Club, Trek FM's local watering hole. We're coming at you all the way from Black Spire Outpost here on the Outer Rim. And with me, as she is every single week, that blue milk fiend, Christy Morris.
Hello. Yeah, I just had, or maybe it was green milk I just had.
Oh,
Isn't that right?
How was the green milk?
It wasn't bad, for moof juice.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I ever since, the Last Jedi and just watching how you get green milk, I just have no interest in it, honestly. So.
It doesn't whet your appetite.
No, it really doesn't. It doesn't. Sea cow, milking just doesn't, it's not my thing. So
yeah. Well, at least we got this from the cantina.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, we're so excited to be here. We're going to be talking about a brand new Star Wars book that just came out, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Fate, as, the Disney publishing arm has also been celebrating the fact that Galaxy's Edge is now open in both Florida and in California. So we're going to talk about that. And before we do that, just a quick reminder to everybody, we want to thank everybody who's been giving us star ratings and reviews over there on iTunes. Help us out. Give us one. Let us know what you think of the show. Help other people find the show. If you do, you'll get a shout out here on the show as well. Of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on pretty much every single platform, plus any podcatcher. Just type the 602 Club and subscribe there, and that way you'll get the episode as soon as it drops. You can find us on Twitter at TrekFM, Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM, and then we've got the listeners-only discussion group there on Facebook. It's called the Babel Conference. 2 ways to get there. Facebook, just type Babel into the search field, or any of the show pages on Trek FM. Click discussion on the menu bar. You can also send us an email. Go to trek.fm/contact. Choose a show and choose the 602 Club, and that'll come to us. And we want to thank, switching things up, really appreciate our associate producers, Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Wyatt Millett, and Daniel Noah for their support of the show through Patreon. These guys have been supporting the network for a long time, and they have chosen the 602 Club as one of their perks to be associate producers through Patreon. Now, we have a very large network here, and honestly, we need your help. Patreon is the way that you can support the network and be part of our team. You are the people who make sure that each of the shows come out to you each and every week. There's so many shows. There's a show almost every single day. In fact, I think there is a show every single day. And more shows coming to you as more things are coming on the network, Star Trek-wise, too. So if you want to make sure that all of this does come to you, again, it's patreon.com/TrekFM. We've got some great contribution levels where you can get extra perks. But honestly, in the end, every little bit helps. Again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. So, Christy, one of the things, I mentioned right at the top is the fact Galaxy's Edge is open. Before we even get to the book, have you been to Galaxy's Edge yet?
No, I haven't, and I've seen several of my friends have, so I'm very jealous. But Michael and I are going to be going next August when we're in Anaheim to Disneyland to see that Galaxy's Edge park.
Yes, that's my plan as well, obviously, because, celebration and, it's living in Washington, I'm not close to anything. I mean, LA is not awful to get to.
You're closer than I am.
Yeah, it's definitely not bad. But, then still you have to find a place to stay and all that kind of stuff. So it gets very expensive very quickly. But, yeah, I'm really excited to go. And honestly, heard good things from everybody that I know that's been there, from, friend John Mills from Aggressive Negotiations. And then we have a bunch of friends who've already been, William and Aaron. And, I mean,
Riley.
everybody has said it's been great. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I've only heard really awesome things about it, especially about Savvy's workshop. So I would love to be able to build a lightsaber and, see all the stuff at the cantina. And it just looks like a really cool place to visit. So
yeah. So, for the book series, the whole point of this is to celebrate a whole new world. And that's the reason that these books kind of exist, is to kind of help introduce Batuu and the Black Spire Outpost. And now, the Thrawn books have also done that, because the second one, Alliances, took place specifically on Batuu as well. And so it's not the only place, and then they've been doing comics too. But I wanted to ask for you, so how do you feel like, if one of the main points of the book is to tell a story around this new experience of Star Wars and a planet that kind of they're definitely trying to get you introduced to, how do you feel like the book does on that front?
I definitely think that this book does a great job at describing the planet of Batuu. I feel like sometimes they overuse the planet name and the word spire or spires. But I think that they do a great job of depicting what it looks like, that lived in feel that we like, about Star Wars. It really seems to me, in my mind, I pictured it a lot like Tatooine. Because it's saying, that it's got these markets and smuggler areas and like back alleys, and then the cantina, and then, that it seems like there's other areas that are more desolate and spread out. And when they talk about like swimming in the cave pools or something like that. So I picture it in my mind, at least, a lot like Tatooine. And that helps me kind of figure out the layout of where everything is. But that's something I enjoyed the most about this book, actually, is the setting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, and one of the things, kind of knowing just the map of Batuu, that, of the actual land, what was interesting to me in this book is that I felt like it didn't feel confined, in the sense that, Star Wars land, Galaxy's Edge, can only be so big. Right? It can't be an entire planet. And so therefore you're going to only get a representation of that at either the theme parks. And so I felt like the book didn't make itself feel like it had to constrain itself only by what you can see in the land. It made it feel like Batuu is a bigger place than just what you would get there. In fact, it kind of reminded me a little bit more of like the size of Lothal and the city there, and Rebels, where it's like they describe all of the major places that you can go, at the theme park, but then there's other places, and the place just felt larger than what you get at, when you visit the park. Because in a book, you're not constrained by that. This is an entire planet, and so I appreciated that part about it, and was glad to see that. And I think for the most part, the descriptions do a pretty good job of bringing the place to life. I would say one of the things in all of the Star Wars books recently that I don't know if it's just because so much of the time we're familiar with Star Wars things, but, I felt like this book could have had even more descriptiveness to it, to really, make you feel like you understood the layout of the workshops that you went in, or the cantina that you went in, and all of that kind of stuff. And I feel like they didn't do as much of that as I would have liked. And part of that is just that, when you're reading a story, you like you said, immediately you think cantina, whatever, you start to think about Tatooine, and you just kind of fill in the details. But, I want Batuu to feel like its own place. And so there were certain places where I felt like it felt more real when they were actually outside of the city than when they were inside the city, because they were explaining the landscape and what things look like with these spires, and like you were mentioning, they have these pools and stuff, and like it made it feel like a very different place than Tatooine. And then when I was in the city part in Black Spire, it just it didn't feel as unique as I wanted it to, and part of that is I think they weren't spending enough time truly bringing the place to life in the way that I would hope that you would descriptively.
Right, like maybe to your point, they're saying, it's like the cities that you've seen before, instead of saying it's similar, but it's its own thing, and here's how it's different. So yeah. I agree, they could have gone that route more.
Because there's a Star Wars language that we use when we kind of describe certain things, and I think a lot of times the authors lean heavily on that. One of the knocks I have against even the new Thrawn books is the fact that like the new aliens, the Grisks, like don't really have a good understanding of what they look like because they've never actually fully been described. And I'm not sure if part of that is just they don't want to describe too much because they don't want to be locked into anything just in case they ever use them. And so, they want to be able to create what they want to create at that point. But at the same time, it's kind of frustrating, like it's just this. So I felt like Black Spire Outpost, it was a little bit like that because, two, you can't just assume that everybody's seen the pictures of Galaxy's Edge as well.
Right.
And you can't, I would say a majority of the people probably reading these books might not have been to Galaxy's Edge yet. So I feel like the whole point of this story and the next one that's coming out, Black Spire, is that you really want to bring it to life in a way that people are like, oh, I have to go to this place. And I don't necessarily know if, for me at least, that they did that.
Yeah, and I think too, especially with books, you're automatically wanting your reader to be picturing it for themselves. And I think that that's part of the joy that you can find in a really great book is getting enough descriptiveness of the environment. And I do think that one thing that was lacking with this was even talking about the climate of Batuu. I mean, you can say to me whether it's a desert planet or a mountainous planet. I mean, there's even one point in this book where they talk about a planet covered completely in snow and ice, and you're going, oh, it's probably Hoth. But it feels like we don't really get that talking about Batuu.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't actually think about that, but I mean, obviously this planet has, water because they go to those pools, so an idea of like how much it rains there and those kind of things. We know that it has trees because they mentioned there being trees, and they don't seem to be super tall trees. So, this seems to be a slightly more arid environment, but, but I'm just
there's some gaps. So, I mean, overall, I think that they did a pretty good job, but I would have liked a little bit more. I agree.
Yeah. And, one of the things, there is a really neat map if you were to buy the book from the Black Spire book that's coming. If you buy that at Barnes & Noble, there's an exclusive edition that comes with a map of Black Spire Outpost, which is cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was excited to see all of the like drawings and depictions of what it's going to look like.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's the main thing I was thinking when I was reading this. It's like, so I'm a fan, but I haven't got a chance to go. So, make me feel like I'm there. And sometimes I felt like I was there more than others. And so I feel like that really could have done a little bit different. But in the end, too, this book is very much a story about our main characters and their kind of coming back together. And it's Jules and Izzy. And so, this is really a love story about two kids having been separated for years and coming back together and finding out that they still have feelings for one another. So, it is, I would say, in many ways, it's about as rom-comish as it can get in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good place to start when you're looking for a great groundwork story to tell, because I think that a lot of unfortunately, rom-coms, but good stories too, have gone that route of, yeah, they grew up together and it was always just the kid next door. And then now they're adults and they're realizing that it's more than just friendship and whatever. So I think that you have a lot to go from doing that. But then there was this really great peripheral story to that about how their families were involved in this, and about how Izzy's family is not actually from Batuu and why they ended up leaving. And, those kind of things. Family drama is a really strong storyteller. And then they've also got this sort of separated lovers story. And so I think that set it up to be really great in the end. And I think that was something I really enjoyed about it, was having these pivotal emotional moments happening throughout the book.
For this book specifically, of all of the YA Star Wars books, I would say that this one is the one that's most firmly entrenched in the genre of YA, and doesn't kind of in any way transcend that at all. I mean, this is very much a very traditional storyline of two people separated and then coming back together and realizing that they love each other. And then a bunch of shenanigans happen, that threaten to split them apart. But in the end, love triumphs. Like, that's pretty much the story.
And I think that there's some parts, though, that feel very more mature, but then the way that it's being told, especially toward the end, I feel like it does hit that point, like you're saying, with the cheesy rom-com. We've got to wrap this all up in a nice little bow. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because you have these two characters, and I think separately there's that. I don't know. I feel like separately they're actually more interesting than maybe they are together. I mean, because of Jules is on the planet of Batuu still, and even though he's had the opportunity to leave, something's always keeping him there. And then Izzy is a character who has lost her parents and is trying to find her place in the universe and where that is. And I think those two stories are interesting, and it's just them being together. Like, they become like foils for each other. But I would say for the most part, it's once they get together, it's really Izzy, the one that has the most growth that happens. I wouldn't say Jules as a character does much growing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Because, I mean, when you think about it, it's really always him doing whatever he needs to do to keep her, and her learning from him and growing as a person and realizing what matters to her instead of just running away. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he doesn't change at all, which is good for him, but not great character development.
I mean, and I think part of that is that for him, he's already a character who's a character is not really necessarily struggling with their identity at all. And whereas, Izzy is struggling with her identity. And for Jules, he grows in the sense that, he is actually willing to leave Batuu by the end, but it's because of Izzy, the thing that he's just been waiting for, basically, to come back. That there's no big secret. That's the reason he never left, because he always hoped that she'd come back. Right. And so, yeah, again, it's not really so much about him having a movement forward, really. It's just more about having that thing that just unlocks the ability for him to leave, which is her. So,
and it kept trying, like the author was trying to insert some growth moment for him or some struggle for him through that whole issue with his sister saying that he was going to go into the academy and then threw it all away for Izzy. But it just still wasn't quite enough to really give him a lot going on. It's like, okay, he had that one minor struggle and now it's over.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, he just kind of becomes the person waiting for love, and it's not necessarily a super interesting story. You know?
He's just the sappy one sitting around going, I hope she'll come back. Yes,
exactly. And he's a good-hearted character, too. There's nothing wrong with that. I just think, there isn't a lot of place for him to grow, but whereas, Izzy is much more interesting because, her whole storyline of it really comes down to this thing, and this is the part that I liked the most about the book was her struggle of am I a Lone Ranger or do I have a posse? This is the way I kind of put it. And so there's that real theme of her where, she's been left alone in the universe, and her mom kind of taught her basically that you can really truly only rely on yourself, and it's led to a really lonely life for her. And by her finding herself back on Batuu with Jules, she realizes that the longing and desire of her heart is to be known and loved and be part of a community. And to me, that was the strongest thing about this book is the whole message of the book seems to be that, like, our lives are so much better in community than they are just by ourselves. And that's a really great message.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't think about that as a key point of the book. I think because it was so woven into everything, it didn't stand out on its own to me as a theme, but I'm glad you said that because that is true. She constantly goes back and forth with that struggle about, do I want to have my own ship and just know that I can take care of myself and I don't have to worry about anybody messing things up for me? Or do I want to follow my heart and go somewhere where there are still people that care about me and rebuild a community? And I think, too, it's sad that you see she was kind of trying to do that with the group with Anatola and Damar. And then it all goes down the tubes because they're not good people.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of see one of the reasons that she feels so unsure about her decision and whether or not, she could truly ever stay with Jules and be on Batuu, is because she's spent a whole life around people like that, And I one of the quotes that most kind of sticks out to me in the book, and I used it in the review because I just thought it was really good, is Jules says to her, he says, I know the galaxy will never be big enough to fill the emptiness in your heart, Izzy, because you don't want it to. You want to keep running because you don't know what you would have to do if you had to stop. And, I feel like there's such a beauty in that truth of, like, there's so many people in this world, and I think many of us have kind of even experienced this, where, like, we're afraid of stopping because then we'd have to look at ourselves and we wouldn't like what we'd see in the mirror when we do.
Right.
And that's kind of the story we get for Izzy, is that she doesn't necessarily like who she's become or who she might turn into if she continues down the path that she's actually on. Because what we learn, too, about her and her parents is her mom was actually a bounty hunter.
Right, when she just thought she was a smuggler.
Right. And so I think she has the opportunity in this book to turn into her mother, and there is that struggle of, do I continue down that road, which will lead to nothing but, loneliness, and possibly an early death, or do I turn my life around and, like, live it for other people and not just myself? And that's the struggle. Obviously, that's the Han Solo story, right? Do I live for myself or do I live for others?
And, it's funny that you say that, because immediately when they were giving these descriptions of Jules and of Izzy, I thought Izzy seems a lot like Han Solo, and that Jules seems a lot like Luke Skywalker.
That's
so
true.
I guess Luke and Han are in a relationship now.
Yeah, apparently. No, but you're absolutely right. You have and it
because he's a farm boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And except that, Jules isn't necessarily longing for adventure. He's just longing for love. And he finds adventure and romance along the way,
But he never left. So he's more of a wuss than Luke Skywalker.
Well, and there's all these talk of like spires and everything. It just made me think of the old movie Romancing the Stone.
It's such a good movie.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that's so interesting about the book, and I think that's the thing that which made me respond to this part, because this theme is really strong with Izzy, and I think that's the part of the story that's it's most interesting, is she truly does. Her character really struggles with this, and she has a very hard time with the process of choosing whether or not she should stay. And part of that is, too, she just doesn't feel good enough. She feels like she's not going to ever be good enough for Jules. She feels like she might ruin his life. Her Jules' sister even makes her promise that if she ever leaves, that she won't come back, because the type of personality that she has might be somebody who just continues running forever and just breaks Jules' heart. And so she has to make that decision. And really, it's the strongest part, I think, of the entire book.
And from that, too, a theme that I got when in seeing Izzy's struggles was that issue of when you're in love with someone, that the beginning of telling them that you love them or trying to start a relationship is a leap of faith. And she's having all these questions in her own mind, and then also with Jules saying, well, what if suddenly you decide that you don't want to be with me anymore? Or what if you decide that I'm not good enough and you find somebody else? Or whatever, all these doubts. And that the story is teaching her that at some point you just have to have faith in the person that they're going to stick by your side.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good point, because, choosing to love somebody and have somebody love you back, it's not as though somebody's never going to hurt you, It's not
right.
as,
we all make mistakes.
Anybody's, perfect. And so, there's that struggle. And I think the story does as good a job as it can in this medium of, with Izzy, kind of trying to make the story as, I guess, more realistic as possible, and the true struggles that come from choosing to love somebody, especially a character like Izzy, who, again, her parents are gone. Her father and her were very close, but her mother and her were never as super close. And, her mother's lessons to her were all about, just taking care of yourself, basically. And so when you have those contrasting views that each even had from her own parents about how life is supposed to be lived, it's no wonder that she's kind of like screwed up, and having such a hard time figuring out how to live her life. And it is, in the end, it's easier to choose to live outside of community, because then you're only looking at yourself, and you don't have to worry about anybody else. But it's also the one that leads to loneliness and frustration, and you end up with people who just end up wanting to commit suicide or whatnot, because they don't have what life is all about, which is relationships with other people, being in community, being there to help each other, which is the storyline that we really see then on the other side, which is the fact that everybody comes together, and all of these other characters in Black Spire come together to help out, Jules and his sister Bellin and their farm, because of the relationships that they have, and so, and that, which is the opposite of what, would have happened with Izzy's, because nobody would have come for her, because she didn't have anybody else on her side until she came back to Batuu.
Right. And they show a couple of times, especially with, who was the Volt? was the guy's name that owned like the pet store.
Yeah.
Especially in his relationship with Izzy versus Jules. It says, when Izzy needs his help, he's kind of questioning the situation. And then when she says, no, it's for Jules, he's like, oh, well, I'll get my rifle right now. And it's exactly what you're saying, that he's built that relationship over time of knowing Jules, that he's willing to go to bat for him. But with Izzy, he's like, I don't know you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's all about the relationships. And those relationships aren't just, transactional relationships. Those are relationships that are built on true friendships and sacrifice and all of those type of things, which make a true community. And so, yeah, that I think that's, again, it's the strongest part of the novel. Now, I would say I'm interested in your thoughts kind of about the rest of the story, because, we're set here in the Star Wars universe, and, this is set on Batuu. But what did you think of kind of about the larger story, other than, we're making it a delivery, and then it turns into a weird heist, and then it turns into a strange battle at a ranch.
Yeah, I felt like the action sequences were very muddled, which I think is what you were saying too. That it feels like it starts off with Izzy separating from her smuggling posse with Anatola and Damar, unwillingly, because Damar says, oh yeah, you're not coming, bye. But then she goes off on her own job and ends up back on Batuu to make a delivery and collect payment for it. And then all these things go awry that mess up that delivery. And then somehow, exactly like you said, she gets into this back and forth with Jules, which is like the main story, but then they get captured and they have a heist, and then all of his friends have to come bail them out, and there's a fight with lots of blasters and rifles at some point.
Yeah. And I think part of what you just described is one of the biggest issues I have with the novel is that, one of the reasons for reading Star Wars expanded universe stories is that they have kind of some sort of impact on the general Star Wars universe. Like, you're reading the story because it's going to add something to your experience then of watching,
Right. And it feels like it doesn't add anything.
Yeah. No. I mean, literally, this story does nothing for anything in the Star Wars universe other than if you visit Galaxy's Edge, which even then, I can't imagine myself really thinking about this book whatsoever while I'm at Galaxy's Edge.
You mean you won't walk in there and go, oh, this must have been where Izzy and Jules reunited?
No. And I think that's really frustrating, because I would say, most of this story feels like kind of a generic sci-fi story with a Western town twist. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily feel like there's nothing in here really that feels like it has to be Star Wars. Like, this could be any frontier town on, a planet. There's just nothing that really truly makes this Star Wars. And I think kind of going all the way back to the beginning, Galaxy's Edge is not part of Star Wars in the sense of like it really being a thing yet, because it hasn't been on screen. And so because I would say a majority of people that are reading this haven't been to Galaxy's Edge, they haven't seen it on screen, and they don't know these characters, you put all of that together, it doesn't necessarily make it feel like a Star Wars book, other than the fact that you use some Star Wars words every once in a while, like blasters, right, or, droid, or, that kind of stuff.
The only ties that I felt like it had toward the rest of the Star Wars universe was, like you're saying, like the name dropping, which actually kind of got annoying because it felt like they're trying too hard to make it fit in. And then the mention a couple of times of the First Order stormtroopers, And then the one time where a delivery ended up being Izzy and Jules meeting up with two people that are part of the Resistance, and it was like a secret meetup. That was cute. But yeah, I mean, it was just these little moments here and there. And otherwise, the rest of the story felt like it was really more of just a romance, and it could be reskinned, I guess is a good word for what I'm trying to say, as something else. Like, it made me think of Firefly, if you've ever seen like the Joss Whedon shows.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think more of a Western and a romance than it is a Star Wars story.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The idea of just, it could be reskinned, because that's exactly, you think about, they do that with video games all the time. They just put a new skin on it, and it's like, oh, you got a new Batman game, or it's, it's Assassin's Creed, you can do that all the time and just change a few things, and you're like, oh, you're in a different universe. But really, it's just the same game mechanics and everything else. And yeah, I think, it was frustrating because the story is, the connections with the Star Wars universe are tangential at best. And yes, there's some First Order stormtroopers there and the Resistance presence, but it's so minor that I don't care. And it's weird because this book takes place after the destruction of Hosnian Prime and The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. So there's major things that have happened in the Star Wars universe, and yet I don't ever feel like any of those things have happened in this universe.
Right.
Maybe Batuu is just too far away to be really affected by that, but I feel like that throws the entire galaxy into whack when the entire Republic has been destroyed. And, so I think that was really the thing I just was really struggling with this book is like, the characters are cute, the storyline is cute, but I don't personally read Star Wars books, and this is just my personal thing, to just get cute stories. Like, I read them because I want them to add something to the larger Star Wars universe, and to me, in the end, A Crash of Fate doesn't add anything to the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I felt that too, even with all of the new characters. I felt like it was almost too many new characters that they're then trying to add in just in this one book, that you're just trying to keep up with what all their names are, what all their species are, and then also the plot. And it was a lot to try and squeeze in that they didn't have to.
Well, and that's another thing too, is like you have all these species, and there are a lot of species that I don't remember what they look like in Star Wars, because they may have been on screen, but I'm not an alien expert. I'm just not. Okay.
You're not?
I don't spend my time, going over Star Wars alien guides and stuff just constantly, so I can remember what all these aliens look like. So I feel like Star Wars authors need to start kind of finding a way to quickly describe different aliens so you can remember what they look like. So I don't have to stop every time and just go to Wikipedia or look it up in, the alien guide I have on my shelf. That's really frustrating. And just assuming that I remember what they look like when it could be the most inconsequential alien in the back of the screen on screen for like 3 seconds, but they're using that alien, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, like the number one species that they mention the most in this book is Ithorian, because Doc Ondar is supposed to be Ithorian. But you don't really remember what they look like unless maybe you've watched like some of the kids' episodes of Clone Wars where, there's an Ithorian that this is going to get his Kyber crystal, or when you really pay attention in the, main saga films. But yeah, like otherwise you would go, okay, what's Ithorian? So like in my head, I think kind of like a hammerhead shark. But yeah, you would need some kind of quick description.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I just think it's not just a problem with this book. It's something throughout all of the new canon Star Wars books that they've almost all of them have been guilty of this. So, I am really interested. So, for you, kind of coming down to the ratings here with Crash of Fate, how did this one rate for you?
So I will say there were a couple of other things that were some dislikes for me. I felt like the naming convention used in the book for several of the characters, in particular with Izzy, was too real life and not as fantasy based in the naming. So, for example, having her have a last name is fine, but it being Garcia didn't feel as creative and as rooted in Star Wars as something like Skywalker or Organa. I mean, even though like Poe's last name is Dameron, which seems a little more everyday, it sounds a little more unique than just like Smith. So her name being Isabel Garcia bothered me a little bit, but I loved her first name. And then I also felt like there were these other thrown in things that would be more realistic and not as fantasy based, like saying there was a DJ or instead of a band, or that there were drinks called a fuzzy tauntaun. And I'm like, it's 2 seconds away from being a fuzzy navel, which is a real thing. So those kind of things bothered me because you want this to be a fantasy. You want it to be a Star Wars book. It's got to have some more unrealistic creative naming than that. So that was the other thing that really bothered me. But otherwise, I think in general, like we said, it's cute, but it's more of a romance than anything else in it. And it doesn't really add anything new to the Star Wars lore or that you'll take with you when you visit the park. It felt like it was a lot of name dropping. So I guess I should give my number though. So yeah, I give it a 5 out of 10 glasses of green milk.
I think coming into this book, I feel bad for A Crash of Fate because the story here has to live up to all of the other really great YA books that we've gotten. So, Lost Stars really set the template. You've had books like Most Wanted, Rebel Rising, Ahsoka. You've had these books that have really taken the genre, and they have been firmly rooted in that genre, but they've found a way to completely transcend that genre as well, to tell really good Star Wars stories, some of the better Star Wars stories that we've had, in new canon. And so when those books have been able to do that, and I've seen the way that they can, when I get to a book like this, I'm just disappointed because I'm used to these books being better. And so having more of an impact on the storytelling of Star Wars itself, so that when I go back and watch one of the films or something, I feel really connected with that more, or I see it in a different way. Especially think of what Most Wanted did for Solo and his character, along with Kira and her character. Fantastic. The same thing for Rebel Rising with Jyn. I see Jyn in a not just a new light, but I mean a brighter light because of that book. Things like that. So, and I even think about what's coming up with Black Spire, and that book immediately has a draw for me because Vi Moretti from Phasma is in that book now. She's
nice.
The lead character in that book, and Cardinal's back too. So two characters that I already know that are connected with the character of Phasma, and things that are going on there, give me a better connection. There's only that very slight connection between the First Order and Resistance here with the delivery they make, and that's it. And so, really this book, it didn't really necessarily fulfill its role in making me want to visit Batuu more and Black Spire, and it didn't fulfill its role necessarily in being a really great Star Wars story. But it's cute. There's a good theme with the story with Izzy, and it's not like I don't like the characters or anything. Yeah, I'm right there, I think, with you too, where this is, I would say, I would be generous and it's 3 out of 5, but it's barely, and that's part because it's not a bad story. It's just not I wouldn't say it's a great Star Wars story, and that's the frustrating part about it. is because, I go to these books wanting a great Star Wars story. So, so that's where we are with A Crash of Fate. Now with our brand new segment that we just instituted last week. Christy, do you have a recommendation to watch and or read, or do you have a recommendation for people not to watch or read this week?
I have another recommendation of something to watch. And actually, you may have seen a couple pictures on my Instagram lately. I've gotten into playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I saw that.
So we're playing 5th edition, and my husband is actually DMing the game. But the thing that really helped with my understanding of it was watching Critical Role on YouTube, which he got me into. And it's a group of voice actors that they just got together one day and decided to play a group game. And then it became something that they were broadcasting on YouTube and got bigger and bigger till they were owned by Geek and Sundry and doing a show every week, and have now had going on for years. So I highly suggest checking out Critical Role, ROLE, on YouTube if you get a chance.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, what a great way to be able to get into that, because then you can, you're having voice actors do it too. That's got to be fun.
Oh, yeah. And because if you know anything about D&D as well, it's a lot of imagination, and you can always give your character a unique voice or accent if you want. So voice actors doing it is like perfect.
I mean, just ask Bruce Gibson about his character. So, my recommendation is that my wife and I went to the theater this last weekend, and we saw a movie called Blinded by the Light, and I would say it is possibly the best movie I've seen this year. It was the most uplifting, the most enjoyable. And it is the story of a young teenage Pakistani boy in 80s Britain who is struggling with growing up in this culture with his own self, and latches on, because of a gift from a friend of his at school, the music of Bruce Springsteen. And it's a true story. It's based on a true story, and it is phenomenal. You'll come out a Bruce Springsteen music fan, but it's just a really great story. I really fell in love with it. It was one of those movies where you just watch, and the whole time you can't... It's just so affecting, and I encourage anyone. I feel like this summer has been really lame for film, but this is a movie that's worth seeking out. It's worth taking your kids to, I think, that are a little bit older in that teenage area. It's a great movie to be able to talk about some of the themes that they go through. I just highly encourage it, and it is a movie that celebrates the way in which music transcends culture. And the way music can reach us when sometimes nothing else can. And I think we've all had that experience in life where you could probably name a band or an artist that had songs that really made a difference in your life, and this movie just captures that so perfectly. So yeah, that's my recommendation this week. Please go see Blinded by the Light. You will not be disappointed. So yeah. Love that we're doing this, because this is fun, because then we get to tell people things we might never talk about necessarily on the show. Right. Yeah, our goal is just to find things that we were really liking and or maybe not liking, we keep you from watching or reading something, or, so, but Christy, if anybody wants to catch up with you online, because I know you've got lots else going on too, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BespinBell, and then, of course, in the Babel Conference. And when I'm not on the 602 Club every week with Matt, I also do a show every other week with my friend Teresa Delgado called Sabers and Spells on the Skynet Network. And that is where we talk about pretty much anything to do with Star Wars, Harry Potter. Recently talked about Stranger Things. We're covering Umbrella Academy. So all kinds of good things over there. And then also I do a show once a month on the Fantha Tracks Network, which finally launched, called Planet Leia, where it's a point of view from women all around the world on Star Wars. And then also once a month I do a 5-minute show on the Star Wars Report called Fashion in 5, about men's and women's Star Wars fashion.
And then you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Faro under all the same name, MattRushing02. You can find me here on the network. When we get an opportunity to record an episode, you'll find me doing The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I do 2 shows over on the Nerd Party Network. One is called Outpost. I do that with Drea Kaufman, and that's all about Harry Potter. We're doing 1 chapter at a time. We're actually almost done. We only have 2 chapters left as the recording of this episode of The Order of the Phoenix. So it's been a lot of fun, so check that out. I'm doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills. Every week we talk about a new Star Wars topic that we're thinking about. We just recently talked about just alien cultures, which is a lot of fun, just kind of going back to all the things we've learned from the movies and TV shows about different alien cultures. And then last but not least, I do a show called Cinema Stories, and I do that with my friend Courtney, and that is where we talk about films, but through the lens of faith. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?